Hello everyone, welcome back. We are going to talk about Canto 9 of Purgatorio today as part of my series of 100 videos about the 100 cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy. Canto 9 of Purgatorio is one of the most complex and complicated, difficult to understand, symbolic. It's so full of allegories, symbols, and different colors, numerology, that I'm gonna try to shed some light on it. Canto 9 is a canto about borders between different areas, and just like Canto 9 in Inferno was a canto about borders. If we remember, in Canto 9 of Inferno, we were just in front of the walls of the city of Dis, and we also had the angel and a lot of allegories there and symbolism. In Canto 9 of Purgatory, we're going to see the perfect delimitation between the ante-purgatory and the purgatory proper, and the door of purgatory. So the canto plays out still in the ante-purgatory, but finally, after this canto, we'll be starting climbing up the terraces of purgatory, starting with the terrace of pride. So we've been waiting basically for 10 cantos to finally get to the meat of purgatory. I love this canto very much because it's one of those cantos that it's really impossible to fully comprehend, and every time you go over it, you will find something different or new that you hadn't understood or maybe seen in that particular light the first time. So that's the reason why probably this video is going to be a little bit longer than usual, because I want to do it justice and try to examine at least all the major symbols and images that Dante is using here. The symbolism in literature, which was very common in the Middle Ages, is a style or a technique that allows us to penetrate deeper realities that maybe if they were told in a simple, plain, rational way would not be as powerful as Dante is doing here. The first three tercets are a conundrum, and they've been a conundrum for many scholars and commentators. Dante says, "Now she who shares the bed of old Titonus, abandoning the arms of her sweet lover, grew white along the eastern balcony. The heavens facing her were glittering with gems, set in the semblance of the chill animal that assails men with its tail." It's interesting here because the translator will translate Dante in a certain way according to the interpretation that the translator herself or himself agrees with. And I notice here in a couple of instances that Mandelbaum disagrees with some of the most commonly used interpretations. For example, everybody agrees that she who shares the bed with of old Titonus is Aurora, the goddess of the dawn. She represents dawn. Some people said that Titonus might have been even Titanus, the god of the ocean, but that's been discarded because it would drive us mad to think what that means in terms of consequences. So let's think about this particular myth where Aurora, the goddess of dawn, fell in love with this human called Titonus, or Titanus, and she went to Jove asking for the possibility to love him. And Jove asked her any type of favor. She asked for immortality for Titanus. However, she forgot to ask for eternal youth. This is why Dante called him Old Titanus, because despite being immortal, he keeps aging. This is a peculiar myth and story that has to do with Aurora and his. And by the way, sharing the bed, or the term concubine that Dante uses here in Italian, concubina, did not have any negative connotation when Dante wrote it. It simply means lover. So here Dante is telling us something about the time, like he's been doing a lot in all these cantos of Purgatory, and he will continue to do. And in fact, following a trend that he's already been following, he's now giving us the time in northern hemisphere of Italy and Jerusalem, and also the time in the southern hemisphere. contrasting them and giving us the sense of the difference. So the way that many scholars interpret these first lines is that it's dawn in Italy. It's dawn in the northern hemisphere, while as Dante says in Italian, nel loco ove eravamo, it's line number 7. In English, it says, within the valley where we were, meaning in purgatory, really. Night had moved across 2 of the steps it climbs, and now the 3rd step made night's wings incline. The majority of scholars say that this means it's almost 9 p.m. in the evening in purgatory, because night had 6 steps to climb from 6 p.m. to midnight, and then 6 steps to walk down from midnight to 6 a.m. And so it's climbed the first 2 to 7 and 8 p.m. And the second one made the 3rd step made night's wings incline. It's almost complete, but not really. So we can call it 8:30 p.m. While in the northern hemisphere, it's actually still dawn. Now, there is this beautiful poetic image of Aurora with her forehead embellished with a diadem of gems. And there is a lot of controversy here, because we have this image, Dante is conveying this image of this beautiful lady walking out on a balcony and irradiating light, the light of dawn, and she has these gems on her forehead. This is how I see it, and this is how it makes sense to me visually. However, some scholars in history have said that the cold animal, the chill animal that assails man with his tail, is supposed to be the scorpion, and therefore the constellation of the Scorpio, and the constellation of the Scorpio is in fact at the opposite side of the sky of where the dawn is rising. So not on the forehead of dawn, but the side of the sky that Aurora is facing. This is why Mandelbaum, in his translation, is assimilating this interpretation and is translating as the heavens facing her were glittering with gems. Personally, I don't particularly like this interpretation because it doesn't make sense to me that there is this beautiful poetic image of Aurora as a girl coming out on the balcony and this beautiful jewel on her forehead, but the jewel is not on her forehead. However, it's in the sky in front of her. It doesn't quite jive. Another interpretation that I found is that the animal is not the Scorpio. The animal, according to others, is in fact a fish or the constellation of the Pisces, and Dante would be referring here to one of the Pisces of the constellation, which in fact is the constellation that is visible at dawn on the side of Aurora. So astronomically, it would make more sense. Now there are some questions, especially, is it the chill or cold animal? Yes, a fish is cold, but is it the animal that is assailing men with his tail? Well, in Italian, Dante says, con la coda percuote la gente. Percuote la gente means that whenever it's a matter of hitting people by this animal are hit by the tail. So we cannot dismiss the possibility that he was thinking about a fish here. And so it's up to you, whatever you prefer, either the Scorpio or the fish and the Pisces, but there is no agreement, and this is one of the first controversies of this canto. My vote is for the Pisces because of the visuals, but we really don't know. I bore something of Adam with me. I was made of flesh, just like Adam, and that's as Dante is speaking, that's his difference with all the other soul, the fact that he is made of flesh and therefore he has to sleep. This is going to be the first time in purgatory that Dante sleeps, the first of 3 times. The 5 that Dante is referring to, of course, are Dante, Virgil, Sordello, Nino, and Corrado di Malaspina from the previous canto. At that hour close to morning, when the swallow begins her melancholy song, perhaps in memory of her ancient sufferings, when free to wander farther from the flesh and less held us cares, at this point Dante falls asleep and has a dream. but not before having given us a very strong reference to an ancient classical myth. In fact, this is also a characteristic of each Canto 9, the fact that they are infused with classical myths. And these myths, in fact, in a canto where nothing too dramatic happens, have the effect of heightening the tension of the narration, especially the references to tragic myths. And in this particular case, in this particular canto, it seems like the myths that Dante chose to quote and to reference have all to do, in one way or the other, with Eros, with the concept of Eros and a tragic ending to this particular movement of the human soul. In particular, here we're looking at the swallow and her melancholy song. There was a sad myth about the rape of Philomel. The rape of Philomel is a classical myth where her sister's husband had been meeting Philomel and attracted by her. He forced himself on her and then even locked her away in a place to do whatever he wanted with her. So that's how cruel and tragic the myth is. The end result is that Philomel is transformed into a swallow, hence the melancholy song of the swallow. This is what Dante is referring to here. And Dante is establishing here, even before telling us about his dream, the prophetic and divinatory nature of this dream. In this tercet, verse 16, where he says, "Free to wander farther from the flesh, our intellect's envisioning become almost divine." He's almost raising a flag to tell us, I'm going to say something that is my dream, but it's a way for the divine to communicate to me, through me, and also to you readers. So what's Dante dreaming about? This is his first dream in Purgatory. "In dream I seemed to see an eagle poised with golden pinions in the sky. Its wings were open. It was ready to swoop down." Just try to imagine this as a cinematic work of art. A couple of comments here. We'll get to the eagle later, but first of all, when Dante says, "I seem to be there where Ganymede," the place where Ganymede was on Mount Ida or Ida in the Troad. So basically where the gods were. The myth of Ganymede is again a myth that has to do with Eros, with a little bit of perversion, because Ganymede was kidnapped by Jove into the, in fact he says here, the Sommo Consistoro, High Consistory, or the Council of the Gods. Basically, we can think about Mount Olympus, and held as prisoner next to Jove to just pour wine into his cup forever as his slave. This is what happened to Ganymede. Why is Dante using Ganymede as a simile for himself? Many different reasons, many different interpretations, and there is not one that is absolutely definitively true. But likely the fact that Ganymede was so high and highly appreciated by the gods, and just like Dante feels like he's appreciated by God himself because he's speaking on behalf of God in his Divine Comedy. In fact, when he says that the eagle in his dream, Dante is thinking maybe this eagle is used to hunt only here and not in other places, betraying some of his pride that he will analyze with a lot of self-awareness in the next canto, in canto number 10. The fire's orbit, mentioned by Dante at line 30, is one of the heavens, one of the astronomical concepts that Dante's contemporaries had in their times. This fire orbit was a circle of fire that was placed just before the circle of the moon and just after the circle of air. The movements of the eagle are impressive, and they are incredibly well rendered with the words, with the language by Dante. There is sound in Dante's words, the sound of the very fast and rapid flight of the eagle that comes down, snatches him and comes back up. Right here, where it says, poi rotata un poco, the eagle rotates a little bit in the air, is circling in the air, then terribil come folgor discendesse e me rapisse suso infino al foco. You can hear this sound of the eagle that comes down and then goes back up in the sky. Now, who or what is the eagle? What does the eagle represent? As very often happens with Dante, there is not only one meaning. So we have a direct meaning, which he's going to explain, Virgil is going to explain in this same canto, which is Saint Lucy. Saint Lucy has come to help Dante move to the place in front of the door of purgatory while Dante was sleeping. So this saint intercession is visualized in his dream by the eagle as somebody who brings light and brings sanctity and grace to his life. So a divine help, really, a divine grace. But at the same time, we can think about the eagle and what kind of an important biblical symbol the eagle has always been all throughout the Bible. In the Bible, an eagle has been, as a symbol, has been used to represent a spiritual renewal in repentance, which is exactly the core of this canto, repentance, penitence, and therefore is the perfect symbol that Dante could choose here. If we think about Psalm number 102, which talks about youth renewed like the eagles. That's in the Old Testament, in the Psalms. Also, the eagle is a symbol for John the Apostle and John the Evangelist. So who knows, maybe Dante thought about that as well. He was a big lover of the Gospel, and he loved John's Gospel very much as well, especially because St. Thomas loved it very much. So maybe there is an angle there as well. And finally, we need to think about the myth of Ganymede. As I said, that's the story of the myth, that he was kidnapped by Jove, but that also refers to the assumption into heaven of a living man, modeled on St. Paul, the story and legend of St. Paul, who was, based on Corinthians, assumed into heaven as a living person. After this LSD dream, Dante wakes up, and we have another strong classical reference here. He wakes up in the same way that Achilles must have woken up right after his mother kidnapped him and took him away into an island to avoid fighting in the Trojan War. After his mother had stolen him asleep away from Chiron. We remember Chiron from Inferno, the centaur who was the tutor of Achilles. And in her arms had carried him to Skyros or Skyros, this island in Greece where there were only women, only girls. And Achilles was there dressed like a girl to hide, in hiding, to not fight the Trojan War. And once again, we can say that there is a sense of eros or love that is not well utilized or not well processed from Achilles' mother and from the entire story. Dante is telling us that as soon as he wakes up, there are three reasons why he should be scared and confused. The first reason is that the only person next to him is Virgil, his comfort. Very poetic way to call Virgil, instead of all the 5 people that were around him when he fell asleep. So that's one reason. The second one is that the sky is already very high, and the sun was more than 2 hours high, means for Dante, always calculating from 6 and 6, so 6 a.m. plus 2, probably he's talking about 8 a.m. And so he's surprised to notice that it's already 8 a.m. And then it was the sea to which I turned my eyes. This is not just a comment about the fact that he was looking towards the sea, which is already a beautiful image because it's already quite high. But he's also telling us that he is more scared and more confused because when he fell asleep in the valley, he couldn't see the sea. Right now where he is, he's got a much more open view on the sea. So third reason, do not restrain, but give free rein to all your strength. There is a lot in these couple of lines. Virgil is telling Dante two things. He's telling him that fear and insecurity have the impact of making us smaller and making our skills smaller, our powers smaller. And at the same time, when Virgil is saying, give free rein to all your strength, he's also talking about the poetic art of Dante. Dante is going to tell us, only a few tercets below, that he's going to move to the next gear in terms of poetic elevation, to elevate his poetry. And this is certainly a reference to what is coming. I find it incredibly lovely the way the narration of St. Lucy coming during Dante's sleep and picking him up and moving him and moving his body towards in front of the door of purgatory is described. St. Lucy is a little bit of a mysterious character in the Divine Comedy because Dante has never left a properly articulated writing where he describes why he chose St. Lucy as this intermediary saint. Many people say that it has to do with the fact that Lucy had to do with eyesight, and Dante had some eyesight issues during his life for reading so much and writing so much. Some other people say that Lucy, from her name that means light, really is the perfect saint to play this role, because light in itself is one of Dante's favorite metaphors for the divine grace. In fact, we will see that in Paradiso, everything is shining with light, just like every angel is in purgatory. On verse number 70, Dante gives us his enigmatic address to the reader. Non ti maravigliar si lo rincalzo. He is drawing on these superpowers of his that Virgil had referred to. He's been addressing the reader before in many different cantos. In this case, to tell us that his topics will be higher, his topics will be deeper and higher, and therefore his poetry will be more elevated. He's literally using the next gear in his poetry. If you remember, his own language from Inferno to here has been increasing in power, in elevation, in nobility, until, and he will keep doing this gradually until in Paradiso, his poetic skills and his poetic language will be at his highest. Now, if we haven't had enough of symbols and symbolism so far until the half of the canto, the second part of the canto will have even more symbols and images and allegories. So let's try to unpack them as much as we can. He sees this fenditure in the rock and he understands that there is an opening and there is an actual door. Let's remember how the door of Inferno was completely open with nothing closing it. It was just open to anybody. This door is instead a proper door. It's closed. There is a guardian in front of it. Is an angel sitting in front of the door. And we have these beautiful and enigmatic steps, each step in a different material and a different color. This is an image that has always stayed with me since the first time I read it, because it's so striking and strong. I don't think anybody had invented it before Dante. This is original Dante in terms of imagery. Here Virgil intervenes and helps Dante communicate with the angel. In fact, there is a beautiful balance, I think, here in this dialogue between Virgil and the angel. And Virgil is, as we said before, growing himself. Here he's not trying to use any type of technique or skill or trick. He's simply stating the fact that St. Lucy came and brought them there. Now, the tercets from verse 94 onward fundamentally represent the sacrament of penance, or what we generally in the church call confession. The way Dante visualizes this, though, is a very interior way, and he's not inventing the movement of the souls that have to do with penance, but he's doing something strange, as usual Dante does, because already within the church, within the scholastic philosophy and St. Thomas, it had been broken down, this sacrament, in 3 steps or 3 movements, in contrition, confession, and satisfaction or absolution. And these 3 movements are also found today in the Catechism of the Catholic Church when it describes confession. So, in theory, the act of contrition, of feeling sorry in your heart, this heartfelt contrition, precedes the act of confession. Some scholars are convinced that the first step that we are seeing here, that Dante describes as white marble, so polished and so clear that I was mirrored there as I appear in life. He can mirror himself exactly as he appears in life, doesn't stand for contrition, but stands in fact for confession. Personally, I tend to agree with that, because there is more a sense of confession in a visualization of reality, something that mirrors the actuality of my behaviors and myself. While the next step is this black, crumbling rock, rough texture with cracks that ran across. It was darker than deep purple. This cracked step is completely different from the first one, is better at representing contrition. In fact, contrition as a word comes from Latin, conterere, which means to smash and to break in little pieces. And I don't see how the root meaning of to smash and break in little pieces might really have to do with confession. So my preference is to agree with those scholars who say that Dante decided by himself to switch the first 2 steps of confession and to put confession first, then contrition, and then satisfaction. It's not a huge difference really, because we're talking about the same sacrament, and it's we can look at it as a unified movement. But we've come to know Dante as somebody who, whenever he has a preference, he will follow himself before following anybody else. So we can read this black and cracked, rocky step as the contrition, and therefore the heartfelt rejection of sin or a sin. And finally, the third step is the satisfaction. The third step is appears to be made of porphyry, a very noble material, as flaming red as blood that spurts from veins. This is a clear reference to the blood of Christ that spurred as the highest sacrifice and therefore allowed us salvation and allowed us forgiveness, which is what absolution is about. And finally, on this upper step, we have God's angel seated upon the threshold, which appeared to me to be of adamant, is made of diamond, stone, the strongest stone that you could think of. The solidity and the stability of and the hardness of diamond has been used by Dante probably to signify the stability and solidity that the priest confessor has to incarnate in the sacrament of confession, the importance of it. He's not telling us that every priest who is a confessor will behave like this. We all know that obviously that's not true. And there is another line that the angel will say later, which reminds us that's actually not the case. But that's the idea. With a lot of spiritual ardor, Dante throws himself at the feet of the angel, and he's asking him to open out of mercy. He uses this key word again. Dante, mercy is the key word for all of purgatory, mercy and forgiveness. And he beats his breast or his chest 3 times, just like still today Christians do at church. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, recognizing the heartfelt contrition for your own sins. And all of a sudden, the angel, using his sword, luminescent sword, draws 7 letter P's on Dante's forehead, and this P stands for peccata, which is the plural of peccatum or sin in Latin. Or it could be the Italian peccati, which sounds exactly as the Latin. As Dante will climb up the terraces of purgatory, every time that he is cleansed of a particular sin, that specific P will disappear from his forehead. It's almost like a video game that he invented for his forehead. And another symbol, another very clear metaphor here for the colors of the angels' garments. They are the color of ashes. And it's beautiful because not all angels have this color. In fact, most of them have very bright or maybe green or colorful or white garments. This one is, his garment is ashes or dry earth that has just been quarried. It symbolizes the humility that the confessor has to have in covering his role of confessor properly. And also within the Bible, ash has always been the symbol of penitence. The ashes, Ash Wednesday, it's always been the symbol of penitence. So it's it's a perfect metaphor or symbol for the meaning that Dante wants to give us here. Also, for our almost indigestion of symbols and metaphors, we get to the two keys, the famous golden and silver keys. Here, the angel, from beneath his robe, he drew two keys. One is a golden key and the other one is silver. These keys are pretty clearly the two keys that God has given to the church in terms of specifically to deliver the sacrament of penance and confession. The first one is the authority to absolve, which is the most valuable, the most important. But the second one is the priest's judgment to be sure that the penitent deserves the absolution. So it's less valuable because it's less valuable than the God's authority to absolve. But just like Dante says here, it's more difficult to use as a key. It requires more discernment from the priest's side. It requires more intelligence and doctrine. In fact, it requires almost a psychiatrist skill from the priest's side because he will need to use the proper judgment to understand it. And here is, as I was mentioning before, what the angel refers to as the potential for failure from the human person who is the priest. He says on verse 121, whenever one of these keys fails, not turning appropriately in the lock, this gate of entry does not open. However, I received these keys from St. Peter, and St. Peter told me to be lenient in letting people through more than people that I don't let through. It's another very interesting theological point. But let's go back to this point of the keys that don't work. The keys that don't work refer to cases where, for example, the priest is wrong in understanding that the penitent soul deserves absolution. Maybe the penitent soul is lying or is just lying to himself, to God, to the priest, and that would be the silver key not working. Or sometimes the priest is actually himself making an undue use, a wrong use of his keys, either the golden one or the silver one. So Dante, as always, is realizing the difference between what the ideal Christian world and how it would work if the church was perfect, and the reality, which is that the church is not perfect. The weakest link of the church was Peter, St. Peter, who, as we all know from history and the scripture, was much less than perfect himself. And it's so beautiful here how on verse 130, Dante refers back to the beginning of Canto 8, because he says, then he pushed back the panels of the holy gate, saying, enter, but I warn you, he who would look back returns again outside. There are so many myths about looking back and becoming a statue of salt, etc. in classical mythology. However, here, Dante is simply saying to us, remember the beginning of Canto 8, when I described that feeling of longing and nostalgia of the seafarer who is in the sunset and is thinking about the past. That moment is something that if we want to continue with our spiritual journey and spiritual growth, we should leave behind the nostalgia and the attachment to our earthly past is not something that is spiritually healthy. This is what he's saying. We can think about it in under the light of God, under the light of the love of life and God that we have today, but not with this melancholy that is prompting somebody to turn around and look back, almost with a little bit of regret for the past. The conclusion of this canto is just as grandiose and at the same time complex and magnificent as the rest of the canto. Really, I think grandiose is the right word here, because everything is spectacular in this canto 9. Dante is referring a myth, or in fact a historic myth or legend, that probably is sourced from the Pharsalia, the third book of Pharsalia, where Caesar wanted to rob the temple of Saturn, where the Romans kept all their treasury, basically the money that was coming in with taxes and everything. He wanted to rob it, and the only tribune or politician who had the courage to oppose him was this Metellus. Metellus was the only one who tried to defend the temple of Saturn, but then he was forced away by Caesar. Tarpeia did not roar nor show itself so stubborn as this door of purgatory. So it's a very spectacular and theatrical opening of this purgatory door. It's a very massive door. So massive, in fact, that as soon as it's open, Dante starts hearing a beautiful music coming from inside. I've always loved this. There's beautiful, beautiful choir music coming from inside. And it's not a normal choir music, but it's choir music that reminds him of what he probably heard in church, of the alternating of voices and organ music. Let's remember that organs were used in church in Dante's times, but probably not very, let's say, efficient and modern organs that we can think of. They were organs, they were very loud, they had this strong, loud hissing sounds. Therefore, when the organ was playing, the voices of the choir were difficult to hear, or sometimes you wouldn't hear them at all. Or even sometimes the choir would stop singing when the organ was playing because it was so loud. And that's exactly what Dante is referring to here in the conclusion of the canto. He's not saying that there is an organ in purgatory where he is entering. He's saying that this is the type of sound that is hearing. And the gentle music is the Te Deum Laudamus. We are constantly showered with Christian music during purgatory, and there will be music, there will be poetry of the highest kind as long as we climb up purgatory and also in Paradiso. I just love this canto, and I hope you like it too. If you don't, that's fine, because it's got a level of oddity and weirdness that I understand is probably not for everybody, but it's one of those cantos that are so, the sound so weird and detached from reality that they are even more real than others, because the elements of reality that Dante is talking about here are very specific. And like always, he's talking about us, you, me, our life, and our day-to-day struggles. So I hope these minutes were useful to you, and thank you for watching this video very much, and thanks for your company. We will speak soon for Canto 10.